Pope Francis has now died at the age of 88. He was at his residence, we understand, when that took place just a short while ago on this Easter Monday. In fact, just yesterday, the Pope was actually seen at the balcony of St. Peter's. That's where he used that moment to call for freedom of thought and tolerance. During his Easter Sunday address. He was, of course, a weekend pontiff, delighted in many ways to see many of the faithful who had gathered there in many instances, hoping for his full recovery after he was hospitalized at Rome's Gemelli Hospital. And in fact, many people had arrived there at St. Peter's Basilica to essentially offer their prayers and flowers in some instances. The Pope's convalescence from pneumonia keeping him away from many of the Holy Week events over the past couple of days. But of course, those closest to him have mentioned several times that he's made a major effort to try and at least be seen waving in some instances to crowds, offering his blessings even to babies, before, of course, being whisked away where we imagined he was given a whole lot more attention. But for many people who had followed Pope Francis's papacy, they'll speak about just how unconventional he's been, especially given the very unique times that he had stepped into this particular position. I mentioned a short while ago that he had come at a time of great confusion. Many of the 1.4 billion Catholics hadn't been alive the last time that a pope decided to step down from the chair and wasn't necessarily replaced after their death. But that is the context in which Pope Francis took up the papacy. Benedict XVI decided that he is no longer strong enough to continue leading this institution, which has its history dating really centuries back. I mean, many people will tell you to the time of St. Peter, the disciple of Jesus himself. At least that's what those within the Catholic Church believe. But what happened is that Benedict XVI decided to step down, and Pope Francis had to step in that context, which means for a brief moment, I think it was just about a year or so, there were two popes that were alive, because it's believed, of course, that once you're a pope, you keep that title until you pass away. And that's certainly been the case for Pope Francis. But outside of that, he's been seen to, call for interfaith dialogue and global diplomacy, right? In many instances, he has reached out to leaders of other faiths, including Islam, Judaism, other denominations within the Christian faith as well. In fact, he was the first pope, we're told, to visit Iraq back in 2021, where he used that opportunity to promote peace in the war-torn region. You can see visuals there of him kneeling down to essentially welcome other leaders who had come to visit him at St. Peter's Basilica. Most recently, J.D. Vance, the deputy president, or the vice president as they call it in the US, was seen having a brief meeting with the wheelchair-bound Pope there in the Vatican. It's something that happened quite a few days ago. In 2022, he also issued a formal apology to the Catholics who had been affected by the role that the church played in cultural genocide of the indigenous people in Canada, especially in relation to residential schools. Through his papacy, Pope Francis had also conducted several pastoral visits. You can see him walking alongside Vladimir Putin, an individual who in many instances in the global north is seen as a villain, but has been able to enjoy the company of the Pope on multiple occasions. Really funny stories sometimes if you listen to those who are close by, mentioning that Pope Francis, because of his desperate attempt to connect with the people, would often break away from his security detail in order to interact with people who had gathered in whatever country he's visiting to try and meet with him. And in fact, you're seeing one of those moments now, presumably in Rome, during one of his many interactions with the faithful who often brave chilling weather conditions, and inevitably that happens, right? When you break away from your security detail, some people of the faithful take an opportunity to try and, touch the hem of his garment, as scripture would say. But in many ways, this is certainly how people, I imagine, are going to reflect on this individual, an Argentine Pope for the first time ever, who was at the helm of this institution, as I mentioned, which has its history go back centuries back, a Jesuit priest. And if you know the different orders of priesthood, many will tell you that the Jesuits are known to be unconventional in their papacy and in the ways in which they do business. And that's why it comes as no surprise that Pope Francis had ruffled a few feathers even within the church, as he pushed many people to think differently about the God that the Catholics preach, who in many ways would not be pushed to judging, especially those who live lives that seem to be different to what Catholics are used to. But a moment in history, and what a striking image this is. A pope who in many instances has been open even about the challenges of being at the helm of the Catholic Church during these unprecedented times. He's spoken out multiple occasions about the atrocities as they're being committed in places like Gaza. He's been a pope that's been very upfront in his push for more reforms to deal with things like climate change. And he's certainly been a pope who's forced many priests around the world to consider just what the church ought to do, given the very unique challenges of our times. And as I mentioned, all of those are likely to really dominate the many reflections around this 88-year-old who's been at the helm since his papacy back in 2013. It's a big story, and as expected, it's currently dominating headlines throughout the world. And if you ask me, will continue doing so until his successor has been elected.